Are you fascinated by the science of meat? That might feel like a strange question, but our guest today absolutely loves the science of meat, and I think the way that she talks about it and her journey will also inspire you. We are continuing our series with COWGIRL Magazine's class of 2024, 30 Under 30, and today we talk with Sierra Jepsen. In this podcast, we go beyond the saddle as we explore professional careers across the equine industry. I'm your host, Katie Kleinbell. Let's tack up and head out. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Saddle. We are right in the middle of our fabulous series highlighting all of the wonderful girls of the COWGIRL 30 Under 30 class of 2024. And we have Sierra Jepsen with us today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having the meat person on the equine podcast.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I cannot wait actually to talk about meat with you today. It's going to be so great. Let's jump straight into it. What do you do? They're probably like, what are they talking about meat? Tell us what you do, Sierra. It is fascinating.
Yes. So I own a traveling butcher school. And so I live in Livingston, Montana, but I travel across the country and train butchers, truly all across the country, and work with small meat processors, medium-sized meat processors, all the way down to folks who are hunters who are interested in, working with their own game and learning how to butcher their own animals at home. And it's such a small, strange industry working in the meat sciences, but I am a meat scientist as well. I actually went and got my master's degree in meat science. And so now I am the owner, the lead butcher, and the meat scientist of Butcher Solutions, LLC, which is my own little meat business.
Oh my goodness. I have so many questions, starting with how on earth did you get into this to be this traveling butcher school? Like, talk to us about how this came about.
Yes, I grew up on a cow-calf operation in Ohio and always loved the beef cattle industry and knew I wanted to be connected with cattle in some way, shape, or form, and would love to talk about all the wrong, interesting paths that actually got me into the meat science realm. But it was through a lot of trial and error that I actually found the perfect industry for me, which was meat science. And I feel very strongly that if it hadn't have been for all of that trial and error, I wouldn't have known that meat science was perfect for me. And that was my corner of the Western industry. And that was my way of being the cowgirl I always wanted to be, was actually to become a butcher and not to become a true blue cowgirl. And so, yeah, I didn't discover meat science until my first senior year at Ohio State. I ended up taking a fifth year just to do meat science and thought I was going to go right into grad school from there to do more meat science things, and had the unique opportunity to take a job at the University of Wyoming first and coach meat judging teams. And I absolutely loved that area of working with college students who were also interested in meat science. And, I was working there for 4 years, loved it. And then that little thing called COVID happened. And so we weren't able to travel to the big meat packing plants that we were normally practicing in. We were visiting a lot more of the smaller meat processing facilities. And I realized that a lot of the small shops were having a hard time finding skilled labor and retaining that skilled labor. And so I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, if I could become a better butcher myself, and it's finally my time to go to grad school and learn all the scientific names of these muscles and how meat science is influencing livestock production, then I could train more butchers and I could help solve some of the issues that we're seeing with our small meat processing facilities in these little communities. And I can help serve livestock producers and give them outlets to market their beef and their pork and their lamb. And so that's what I did. So I went to grad school with this business in mind, and I knew I was coming back to Montana when I finished grad school, and I I had kind of kept my feelers out for what other jobs I could have when I got to Montana. But at the end of the day, there were no other jobs that excited me the way that starting my own business did, and this idea that I had in my head to create a traveling butcher school. And so I graduated December of 2022, and I moved to Montana that day. And then by the next week, the business was started. And so it's been going full force for a full year. And so we're rounding the corner on year 2, and excited to keep traveling the country and working with butchers, and keeping those small shops alive and relevant for the livestock producers that really rely on them.
I love what you said about becoming the cowgirl you wanted to be. And you have found this amazing niche, like this need in the industry. And clearly you are a natural teacher. You had that tendency to sort of, help people learn in this journey. And here you are living it out every day in the ways that, maybe you didn't even foresee. I think that it's amazing how our journeys come to life as we just sort of like let the things unfold and follow. You followed your heart, girl.
Oh, and yeah, it's so true. I mean, my sister and I, she's 18 months older than I am, so we were always just 1 year apart in school. And we grew up in Ohio on cow calf operation. It was also a grain farm, so we did the whole Midwestern gamut from beef cattle, corn, wheat, soybeans, hay, all of it. And yeah, we had pasture ponies growing up, and we enjoyed the trail riding side of the horse industry, but we never had the opportunity to get into rodeo or to work cattle by horseback, because we had four-wheelers, and we have 10 acres here and 10 acres there, and it's all kind of patchwork together. And so she and we always wanted to be the real cowgirls. We wanted to work cattle with horseback, and we wanted that kind of a story. And we didn't feel like we were fitting into that Western lifestyle the way that we wanted to. And it's so funny, like looking back now, it's like, no, like the world is full of all kinds of different cowgirls, and it takes all kinds. And it's like, why couldn't we see that when we were younger, and we felt that true imposter syndrome of, I want to be a cowgirl, but I'm just a girl in Ohio that raises cattle. It's like, that is what a cowgirl is. And so now I feel so fulfilled that I found what I was meant to do. I knew growing up that I really love the beef industry, but that side might not be outside working with the cattle every single day. And so now that I've found my corner in the meat science industry, I look back at all of the paths that it really took me to get here, and I have this new sense of identity. And it makes you just want to talk with those younger gals who questions like, am I a real cowgirl, or what is my cowgirl story, and how do I actually fit into the bigger tale of the Western lifestyle, even if you're living on the East Coast or in Florida or in Missouri and Arkansas. It's like it takes cowgirls all over the country to be a true cowgirl.
Oh my gosh, yes. And cowgirls of so many different kinds, like you just said, like fitting in, I feel like is this desire we all have, right? Like we've got, I'm a horse girl and I love to ride my horse, but maybe I don't compete, but like I've got that like pull to this Western industry, but like I want to be defined as a cowgirl. And to be fair, I don't think being a cowgirl, to your point, really has that definition. I think if you're living your best life and following the purpose that you set out to find and discover in your own little niche and your corner of the world, you wrangle it and you be the best version of it that you can, and you support the Western way of life, you're a cowgirl in my book.
I agree full-heartedly. Oh, yes. And I'm really excited to meet the rest of the gals that are a part of our class, because I mean, we do truly come from all different aspects, from being rodeo coaches and media influencers, and gals writing articles, gals being at the front of the articles. So I think our class is really unique, and which, I mean, Wrangler does a great job of selecting really unique stories to show that entire aspect of the Western industry.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. There's such a variety there, including a meat scientist. So tell us, for those who may not be familiar with, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a meat scientist?
Yeah, the meat science industry, or not industry, but I guess the practicum, it's still housed under animal science. And so when I was an undergrad, I minored in animal science. I never wanted to be a vet. I found that I would probably have a higher success rate of letting things stay dead rather than trying to keep them alive. So I was never interested in working with sick animals. I wanted to work with healthy. And so the meat industry really wants to focus on all aspects of that animal science practicum as well. And so meat science can be anything from animal welfare of our livestock to meat quality and meat quality defects, and how can we care for healthy livestock to make sure that we have the highest quality meat products, whether that's let's keep let's keep meat color as vibrant as we can for consumers, or let's figure out how to increase the marbling, which is intramuscular fat, while decreasing the external fat. And how do genetics and nutrition play a role in bringing the highest quality meat product to a table. And then there's also aspects of sustainability. How can we reduce water usage in meat processing? And so my area of meat science is, I'm kind of a cut it and weigh it meat scientist. I'm not super deep into the myology and the molecular makeup of components of meat. I am a scientist who wanted to explore how to get more innovative cuts out of a beef carcass. And so for some of our listeners, you may have eaten a flat iron steak before. The flat iron steak actually comes out of the shoulder of a beef animal and wasn't discovered until the early 2000s. We used to just take a beef carcass, and we took the shoulder and would just run it across the bandsaw and would have these really big multi-muscle steaks and roasts, which are really delicious in a crock pot. But we as meat consumers, we really like tasty, tender, individual muscle steaks. And so my research is doing similar muscle profiling that they did on that beef shoulder, the chuck. And I was looking at the sirloin and wanted to find that, okay, we've got the sirloin, which is very popular in, Applebee's and the Texas Roadhouses and just kind of the middle line of the road steakhouses. And sirloins, they're an okay cut. And sometimes we have a great eating experience, and sometimes it's not so great. And so I wanted to figure out how to make those cuts more consistent. And it all came down to how we were actually cutting the sirloin. The sirloin has 4 different muscles in it. And so if we take apart those 4 different muscles, and rather than cutting them as one big multi-muscle steak, what if we peeled them apart and we found which one of these muscles is the most tender and which one holds the most water, meaning it's the juiciest. And so which one's going to be the most red and therefore would be the most eye appealing to consumers. And we actually did find that there's a secret little muscle that we're currently putting into ground beef that has the highest water holding capacity, so it's going to be the most tender. It's really, really tender. It's going to be really juicy. So it was fun to discover the sirloin tender and figure out where its place in the meat market might be. So I have a lot of fun now as this traveling butcher educator. I get to go around and now teach people how to make the most out of their beef carcasses. And I also work with pork carcasses and lamb too. But being that I knew the beef cattle industry was always where I wanted to be, I was excited to find my way into a research project that also got to work with beef carcasses, which are the most complicated to cut.
Who knew? I feel like you just took us to class. Like, I just learned so much in listening to you talk about all the nuance and the innovative cuts and, how you approach an animal and your science. So interesting. And I'm curious, it leads me to a question about your class, because you are teaching people, that's your business model. How much of your teachings are hands-on? Like, are you, is it lecture? Is it, workbooks? Is it what does that look like? What's your environment of, your teaching practices?
So I think of Butcher Solutions as having 3 different buckets. And the first bucket as the True Blue Traveling Butcher School, where I will visit any meat processor anywhere in the country and just show up to their facility and work with their carcasses, their employees, their own facility, hands-on, because it's so easy to roll up to a university workshop or to go to a conference and listen to a session. But until you get home and you actually try it at your own facility, those meat processors kind of have a hard time putting that into practice. So the traveling butcher school is always hands-on. And very little of that is academic. It's mostly just showing people what they need to be faster or cut differently or make the best use of their facility. So that's bucket number one. Number two, I think of as meat science education. So whether that's working with 4-H and FFA groups to help coach meat judging teams, whether that is going to a livestock producer, maybe it's a beef producer who wants to do a farm to table setup, and we can actually, have a little presentation with their crew and talk about, what kind of brand standards do you all want for your product, or how do you set pricing, or what cuts should you pick, and how do you find a butcher that's going to work with you? And so that meat science education could be everything from, youth up to livestock producers, even to those hunters who are interested in harvesting their own animals. And that whole meat science education piece is a little hands-on and a little academic to teach people. It's like, okay, here are the cuts, and let's look at it on a piece of paper, and then let's also, visit a processing plant or get our hands on actual meat products so that it kind of, ingrains that information. And then the third bucket is working with the meat industry. And whether I've got projects going on with the USDA, we're working on developing a new USDA grading camera that could go into big packing plants and grade beef carcasses in smaller facilities. I've got some projects working with some engineering companies so that we can use more technology in meat processing plants. And so that industry piece is then just kind of using some of the boots on the ground. And if somebody needs a meat scientist to go into a processing plant or to work with folks hands-on, I can kind of be that middleman between the engineers and the brains behind the operation, and then actually going into the meat industry and helping out some of those folks.
It sounds like such a well-rounded approach with those three buckets, right? Because you've got like these different varieties and different actions, right? To keep your day interesting, I bet, between the traveling side, the education side, the industry side. I don't think you're ever bored.
Well, and so thinking along the theme of all of the wrong paths, that was something I learned from my very first internship, was that I need something every single day that gets me excited. And so when I was building this business, I realized that not every day are you going to get excited about the exact same thing. Consistently, I am excited by meat and by the meat industry, but that doesn't mean that every day I'm excited to be out there cutting meat. Some days that means that I want to help people with their cut sheets, or I want to be working with the livestock producers and walking through their feedlots and looking at their cattle. And so I learned very quickly that I need that variety. And so now that I started my own business, I could build in variety because I'm the boss. And if I'm not happy with my own business, then that's my fault.
The beauty of being your own boss. Yes. Oh my goodness. And I love this theme that we've been sort of touching on. So let's really get into it. All the wrong paths and how that shapes your journey along the way. And Sierra is like me, and she is an advocate for those internships to help you sort of explore those ways that maybe the things that really resonate with you and maybe the things that don't, which is just as important as knowing what the wrong path is. So let's dive into that. Like, what does that mean to you? Like, what lessons did you learn, and what were some of those wrong paths?
Absolutely. So anybody, I guess right off the bat, anybody who's listening to this, who's owning a business or working for a company, if you do not have an internship program set up yet, make sure you get one set up for this summer, because it's the perfect way to have low risk and high reward for everybody involved. Because we know about younger generations, we are not staying in jobs for the long haul, the way that our older generations and our parents were. And that has its pros and cons, because we as younger generations, we want variety, and we want to feel fulfillment in our work, and we want just to be excited by it. And so Forbes did some information that the millennial generation on average is staying in jobs for about 4.4 years, and then we're moving on, which is, looking for something different or looking for some variety. And whether that's good or bad from your perspective, I think it's a good thing because it's helping those workplaces as well to stay kind of on the cutting edge with people who are always bringing in fresh ideas, and then they're not having to invest all that the money and the capital to keep a long-term employee. It's keeping the waters fresh, but some people see that as a bad thing, where younger generations, we are flaky and we can't stay committed and we aren't loyal. And so thinking about how are young people going to find a career that excites them every single day and keeps them longer than that 4.4 years, how are they going to do that when a lot of the workplace is either asking for an advanced degree or they're asking for years of experience? And students, they get out of college and they're like, well, if I was getting that advanced degree, I wasn't out there getting experience. And so the answer I have for those students is go and take internships. Every single year of your college endeavor, or right after high school, if you're not interested in college, rather than grabbing a job right out of the gate, you can go and intern some places. And internships are 2, 3, sometimes 4 months. So they're short term. My grandma at one point, she had asked me, she's like, Sierra, when are you going to get a real job? And I'm like, Mom or Grandma, my internships, they actually pay me, which is different than internships that our grandparents think of when, you'd get somebody their coffee or, whatever it might be. It's like, no, internships nowadays, especially in agriculture, they give you projects and they treat you like you are a true cog in that company's culture, and they want your ideas and they want your input. And you truly get in or get out of internships what you put into them. And so I was really fortunate to have 4 different internships throughout my college career. As I mentioned, I was an animal science minor. So it wasn't my major. My major was actually agricultural business. I knew going into college, my dad had given me some advice that when he was in college, he would have taken more business classes and he would have paid more attention in those business classes. And so my mind, I was like, okay, I'll go and I'll get this business degree, and then I can apply it to the beef cattle industry, however I decide. And in the ag economics and ag business world, kind of the pinnacle job that you can get is working with Farm Credit, because they sponsor a lot of scholarships and they help you out through your undergrad career, and they help finance a lot of local producers and agricultural entities. And so, wow, like if you're going to be in business and you're really going to make a difference, Farm Credit's the way to go. And I was fortunate. I stumbled into this Farm Credit internship my freshman year of college, and they just didn't have all the seniors apply that they thought. So they gave it to this little lowly freshman. And I was like, wow, I'm going to have this internship right off the bat. I'm going to intern with them for 4 years. And then when I graduate from college, I can go right into working with them and it'll be awesome. And I quickly realized that it was not for me. I was not business minded enough. And when I was looking back on that internship and what was my favorite day, what was my favorite activity that we did, my favorite activity was a weekend that we volunteered at a local county fair with their cattleman's trailer, and we were serving cheeseburgers and ribeye steak sandwiches at the county fair for a day. And that was when I realized that it didn't matter what job I had, it had to be connected to beef cattle in some way. I needed cattle in my job. And so that was like the big takeaway from that. And that seems like a small takeaway of, it didn't matter, day-to-day stuff. I wasn't going to pick apart the job itself. I just knew I need cattle. So then the next internship I had was working with certified Angus beef. And I figured, it's like, okay, I know about myself that my sister is the true blue rancher of our family. And she will, she loves being outside with the cattle every single day. And for me, I might not be as hands-on, or I don't want to be outside every single day the way that she does. So I could work with the beef cattle industry through working with more of the promotion of the protein and working with the livestock producers to brand and market their cattle. And again, cannot say enough great things about that internship and the public relations experience that I got. At the end of that internship, I sat back and I was thinking, it was really wonderful to work with consumers and chefs. But at the end of the day, I felt like I was sharing the same message over and over, the same, 10 essential vitamins and nutrients that beef provides, and the same cookery methods. And maybe I need a little bit more of production in there. So then that led me to my third internship, which was actually a cattle ranch out here in Montana. And I knew it's like, okay, I don't think that I am the one who will be raising the cattle every single day outdoors. So I'm going to take this 2 or 3 month internship, and I'm going to be the cattle rancher and the cowgirl that I always wanted to be. And I'm going to ride horses and work cattle. And, I get to live that Western lifestyle so that if I do end up going back to more of an office or a public relations space, I can then still tell that story because I did it. Whether it was in college or, my whole life, I at least did it for a couple of months, and I can share that story and those experiences. And so I came out to Montana from, it was January through May. So you can imagine how cold that was. And I did a calving internship here in Montana, and I survived it. It was a really tough couple of months. It's hard work, but I was so fortunate for that experience. And at the end of it, I realized again, I was like, okay, this confirms I love what our cattle ranchers are doing every day. It is not what I'm cut out to do, because it's just hard work. And so I could sit back and say, all right, there's got to be some way to bridge the gap between the work I was doing at Certified Angus Beef, which was working with the consumer, and then the work that I was doing at this ranch in Montana, where I was actually working with the producers. And I couldn't figure out what that bridge was. I didn't quite know, and it wasn't in the cards for me to know yet. So I went back to school, and returned for it was then coming up on my 4th year, my senior year. And again, I wasn't an animal science major, I was a minor. And so there was this beef production class that I had been waiting for my entire college career, that you only took when you were a senior. And I was so excited to take it. And when I went to sign up for that class, the course was full because animal science majors got first pick. And I was distraught because I had waited so long to finally take this beef production class, and I couldn't get in. And so I decided to settle on taking a meat science class instead, where, it's like, all right, beef, cattle, meat, I guess it's kind of the same thing. And it is not, because I found that was where I was supposed to be. By the second day of that meat science class, I was on fire for the meat science industry. I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. It's the perfect bridge between what our livestock producers do every single day to care for their animals, to work with the genetics, with the nutrition, with just the all-around care of creating this well-rounded, healthy meat product. And then how do we get that to our consumer? And then how do we share that with the consumer? How do we educate them about meat cuts and the nutritional aspects of consuming animal proteins? And so it was the perfect middle ground. And I got to work with knives, and I still got to work with the livestock critters, and I got to work with my hands, and I got to buy knives instead of books. And the meat industry, like the history of it, was fascinating, and the science that we were doing with the proteins was fascinating. And that was when I realized it's like I can still be a cowgirl, and I can still be in the Western industry, but I can still share that story with consumers about the meat products, not necessarily about the live industry. And I can let my sister, who's really wonderful about raising those cattle, I can let her be the production story. And now I can be the comforting sounding ground of then how do we get that animal from pasture to plate. And so, it wasn't until I found meat science that I could look back at how did all of those internships actually play a role in molding me, that I could realize, I was grateful that I had said, this job is great, but there's something different. And I could recognize in each one of those paths, there's something that I liked. And I could then incorporate that into finding my next step. And I would say, okay, this is what I really liked, whether, it was a small little aspect of, I just need beef cattle. And then the next small aspect of, okay, I need something different every single day. And you just take that and you snowball. And there's a lot of really interesting research from Yale and Harvard about how humans are really, really bad at predicting what's going to make us happy. If anybody needs another good podcast to listen to, I recommend The Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos. And it talks about how humans, we are bad at knowing what makes us happy and what we need every single day to make ourselves happy. And it's never what you think. And it's funny as I look back on the internships I've had and the opportunities. It's always good to reflect on the small things that you didn't expect and the ways that they really filled your bucket. And they filled you up and they lit you up and they made you feel the way that you always want to feel about a job. And whether then you take that and it's like, okay, I've burnt out and it's time to find something different. You have to always take inventory of what are those little things that make you happy every single day and appreciate them, so that then you don't throw away all of that happiness and say, yep, that wasn't for me, I'm moving on. Because there are probably little things in that bigger experience that did fill your bucket, and you don't want to completely move on from that without giving it the appreciation that it truly deserves.
I am such a big believer in everything happens for a reason. And it's hard to trust that when you're in the moment, but you gave us so many tangible examples. And thank you so much for going in depth into your story to really help paint the picture of what you learned along the way and how you used every single one of those experiences to help answer that question and craft your journey, because it's not black and white and it's not a straight arrow line. And no one's going to sit there and tell you this is what's going to make you happy. And you might try to do that to yourself, and you can't even figure that out unless you're willing to sort of explore and let those, moments in your life shape you and your journey and, develop that career that you didn't even know was out there until that fateful day that you could get into the class that you wanted and you landed in the perfect place where you were meant to be.
Oh, and I'm such a firm believer that young people, we go to college or we're in high school, and folks are always asking us what we want to be when we grow up. And gosh, there are hundreds of jobs that are getting created every single day that we didn't even know existed. And that was always something I wanted. It's like, I want a job that nobody even knows about right now. It's like, well, I'm a meat scientist now and I own a traveling butcher school. That definitely fits the bill. And man, it's like, why do we all try to put ourselves in this one, cowgirl box or this one agricultural box, when no job is just a cookie cutter of what we think it'll be? And so we've got to let ourselves just let it be, and do what makes you happy.
Yes. And let yourself sort of explore what that might be, because it may surprise you. And I think there's a really powerful nugget in the story that you just told. And that is, at the end of each one of those experiences, you didn't look back on the internship and think, like you said, I didn't throw this whole experience out because it wasn't for me. You look back on each one of those experiences and said, what was the best day in that role? What was it that did light my soul on fire? And you took pieces of those positive moments to build then and redirect your path, rather than looking back and saying, the opposite would be looking totally down that dark negative tunnel of, well, I didn't like this and I didn't like this and I didn't like this. That's not what you did. And I think that's so powerful and such great, wonderful advice for anyone that finds themselves, I don't care what industry you're in, but here in our Western space, in our equine space, you may not find that perfect, checks all the boxes, but you may not know what those boxes are. So look back and see what, did set your soul on fire, and use that to inform your decisions in a positive track. Don't look at it in the negative light. I love that.
Oh, well, it's so funny, what a turn of events. The major professor that I ended up doing my master's work with at the University of Idaho, he had been the lead meat scientist at Certified Angus Beef when I interned there. And I loved when I got to break out of the public relations office, and I got to, wander down to the meat lab, and he was this engaging, funny, energetic guy with a knife. And I was like, wow, he is the funniest person. And how do you tell so many meat jokes and make it exciting? And it just so happened that several years later, we stayed in contact, and he ended up, heading further west to the University of Idaho. And so you never know when you might reconnect with some of the people that you meet in a completely different space. And so, we all know not to burn our bridges, and, to truly, take the best out of every opportunity. And you never know. Our life is short, but the world is small, and you never know how our nets are gonna retangle and catch us something even bigger and better than we ever dreamed.
It is so true, especially in the Western industry. It is such a truly small industry. And I don't mean that in terms of volume. I just mean that in terms of connectivity. There is so much overlap between what you're doing and how horses have influenced your world and your life every day. I bet there's overlap between like the people and the circumstances that influence your world in the meat science sphere that I'm dealing with here in equine media. Like there is so much connection that you just can't overlook, and you never know what door is going to open and who's going to be influential. And, someone may move from the meat industry to the cattle industry to the equine industry and back. It's exciting to see. And it's so fun to kind of sit back and watch too, which is another reason I'm really excited about our Cowgirl 30 under 30 class, because we're here now knowing, who we are, right? Coming into that room together as this class of 30. But in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, I hope there's ways we can stay connected, because that landscape's going to change, and it's going to be so fun to see how our relationships and our world professionally and personally continue to be intertwined as we move forward.
And I can't tell you how excited I am just to be able to sit down and talk about horses with other people, because it's like, I get to talk about meat every day, and I get to talk about cattle and pigs and sheep. It's like, I love horses. And I can't wait to just sit down. It's like, what's your horse's name? And do you do, roping, or do you do working horse events, or are you, it's like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to talk to some of our equine specialists.
Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. And I feel like horses are like this great equalizer, right? Like you said, there's such variety in this class of Cowgirl 30 under 30, but in some way or another, almost every single one of us relate back to horses. We were crazy horse girls somewhere in our journey, or maybe we're going to be in the future, right? Like we're getting to that point in our lives where we can buy our own horse or buy our own property. And it's this great common denominator in this thread that just like opens up conversation and your hearts, because it's something we all love so much.
It's really impossible to be a cowgirl without loving a horse.
There's one thing. We did define that little piece. Yeah, if you're going to be a cowgirl, you should probably love horses.
I love a horse girl too.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Sierra, this has been so much fun. Thank you again for coming on the show, for giving us such a colorful, painted example of how all the wrong paths really shaped you into the woman that you are today. And thank you so much for sharing your business with us. I can't wait to meet you in person and get to talk to you. All of our listeners out there, you need to go follow Sierra on social media, and just she's going to be your new favorite meat science friend that you didn't even know that you needed.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie.
Thanks for riding along in this meat-filled episode of Beyond the Saddle with Sierra Jepsen. Stay tuned for more episodes with COWGIRL Magazine's Class of 2024 30 under 30.